Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and I'd like to just, before we get into the review, address something that's come up a lot since I've been doing the Skull Island videos. I've noticed people saying that they think I shouldn't be doing this episode by episode, that if I watched the show all in one go, just binged it from start to finish, that was the proper way to view it. Now, the thing is, I don't agree. I don't think that would have an effect because, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but I have never had that sort of thing affect my enjoyment of a show, or lack thereof. I generally watch things one episode at a time because I've got other things I'm doing. If I have nothing else to do, I might watch more than one episode of something at a time, but generally I do it piecemeal. And even with shows that are designed to be binged, particularly the Netflix kind of shows that invented that model, it doesn't matter if I'm watching it all at once or bit by bit. The quality, or lack thereof, still comes through. Stranger Things is a perfect example. That show was designed to be binged, I watched it one episode at a time, and yet I still came out of it thinking the first season was phenomenal. The second season was a step down, but still great. The third season was a complete misfire, and the fourth season was better than the third season, but I only watched up to the halfway point, and I've never felt any particular desire to pick it up again. I don't know why. But the point is, it didn't affect me. It didn't matter that I was watching it one episode at a time. Same with Wednesday, the more recent series. Now, as an Addams Family fan, I don't think it's my favorite adaptation of that particular property. That title will always go to the original 1960s show, but it still wasn't a bad show. I could at least tell that Tim Burton wanted to make it as opposed to the stuff Disney was saddling him with. So I thought it was fine. I thought it worked, and it didn't matter that I was only watching it a little bit at a time. That is, episodically. So I really don't think that the fact that I'm watching Skull Island this particular way has anything to do with my disappointment, I guess. I see it no different than reading a book one chapter at a time. I mean, if the story is good, that goodness will shine through no matter how much or how little of it you experience at any given point. Now, I just wanted to clear that up. Let us get on to the review of episode 7, and I will begin by asking this question. Why wasn't this the whole show? I am surprised after 6 episodes of not liking anything to discover that this episode actually is good. Is it great? I wouldn't necessarily say that because it feels like there's... Okay, well, first of all, let me not get ahead of myself. The reason I think this episode works is because the storytelling is so much better. It's a flashback to however long before it takes place in the main show. I don't know. They never actually specify when the show takes place. A lot of people are saying that it's set in the early 90s, prior to the events of Skull Island, the birth of Kong. They don't really say that specifically, and there's nothing in the series to definitively tell us one way or the other when it's supposed to be set, so space is warped and time is bendable. Who cares? Point is, this is a flashback where we see why Kong is so melancholy when we first really get to see him in a more recent episode. And we see that he actually had a bond with someone. Yeah, in a bizarre twist on the classic King Kong formula, Kong finally has a female companion who is not only on good terms with him, she's actually basically his partner in crime, or rather partner in maintaining order. She doesn't have a name in the credits. She's just called Island Girl, which kind of undersells her importance, if you ask me. But anyway, we get to see their dynamic and how they work together to maintain balance on Skull Island. Though I'm not entirely sure how it's supposed to work here, because they only deal with one skull crawler, and the primary opponents for the rest of the episode are these giant chameleon things, which we've never seen before and are not likely to ever see again. I don't know why they couldn't have been skull crawlers, other than the fact that they could play around with the whole color changing thing, which I admit was an interesting visual, but for all intents and purposes, they still served the same purpose as a skull crawler. So was it really worth just that? I'm not entirely sure myself, but all the same, the main focus is on how Kong and Island Girl, can't believe that's what they decided to call her, interact and go about this whole thing. And we get a sense that while they do have a partnership and they do work together well, Kong is still very much the one who believes himself to be in charge and will do whatever he wants, even if it's not the best idea. Which leads to the central fight in the whole thing that nearly gets Island Girl killed. Although they're not completely alone in that either. Apparently the bird we've seen the past couple episodes is also part of this. It's kind of interesting, like, he even lands on Kong's arm. It's like, Kong's taken up falconry, who knew? That's a profession worthy of a king after all. Not profession, but like pastime. You get the idea. It's interesting to see Kong have another partner in this. Like, he's not that alone in this version, at least not at first. The bird, of course, is still around and still doing certain things like dropping off food for him, I guess. But then we learn what actually happened to Island Girl. We also learn why the main antagonist, that weird Kraken thing, didn't show up until just now, because it was awakened when Kong was cleaning off a wound. So having that explanation built in, I actually thought was another little good piece of writing this episode did. They actually have a built-in explanation for why we haven't seen this thing before. Nice touch. I will recognize that. Now, I think it's also worth noting that Island Girl and her tribe are not the Iwis. First of all, they speak. Second of all, they speak Spanish, I believe it is. What few words I recognized lined up with stuff I had in Spanish class way back in high school. And third, they're not like done up in makeup or anything, and their clothing looks a little more, I don't want to say contemporary, but it's clearly not what the Iwi dress like. So clearly these are other shipwrecked people. And actually, like, you know what, I'll get to that later. Now, like I said in other videos, both in this particular Skull Island review series and other videos just on my channel, giant monsters, I believe, are characters just as much as the humans are. If you look at a giant monster and you only see a special effect, you're kind of missing the magic of this particular genre. And that is why I find it so disappointing when there are movies that don't depict kaiju as interesting characters. Before I get too far on that tangent, though, the point here is that Kong is definitely a character, always has been. And here, he carries a large portion of the episode. He is very expressive. You can tell what he's thinking, even without his interactions with Island Girl. Does she have an actual name? I'm dying to know. But anyway, you can tell from everything he does, his body language, his facial expressions, all of it. It kind of reminds me of Primal. I saw some people saying that this episode was kind of like Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, and I can see the similarities, yes. Obviously there's more dialogue in this than in Primal, but the point is, Kong finally gets to be in focus, and it was worth the wait. We really do feel for him, especially when Island Girl dies. All of that village dies, and apparently he was really attached to this village, but because of that, we see him just be completely broken. Kong has lost. He both lost the battle and he lost people he cared about. Probably the only other beings he ever cared about. And if this really is going to stay in continuity with the Monsterverse and not be retconned, the only people he will care about until the events of Godzilla vs. Kong. So, seeing how that all plays out, I do agree. That was really good. Which is why I once again ask, why wasn't this the show? Why, if you had this level of writing that you could pull off, and you could use the medium of animation to convey all of this stuff, why did you bother with all that crap in the first 6 episodes? Episode 7 actually is good. I don't think it's great, but it is good. It's way better than what we've seen. On its own, just completely in a vacuum, and if you cut out the last few seconds, I really do think it is a good piece of animation. And that just makes the whole experience even more frustrating, ironically enough, because they could have been delivering stuff like this the whole time, and they weren't. Now, I did allude to the idea that there were certain things about this episode that didn't work as much for me. Among those things is the fact that even though we get a pretty good sense of who Island Girl is, I don't think we spent enough time with her to really say that she is a great character or even the best character of the bunch. I had first wondered if they were going to reveal that maybe she was the mystery islander who showed up and saluted Charlie before the bird carried him off, but she's dead, so clearly that's not the case, and I have no idea if we're actually going to find out who that was. I don't think it was an Iwi either. I don't see why it would be. But anyway, I feel like we didn't get enough time with her to really call her a great character, but I do think if we had spent more time with her, she could have been great. But I think this is her only go, so yeah, that's unfortunate. Also, there is a lot we see in this episode that makes me question if this project really was originally part of the Monsterverse or if it was its own thing. Because this depiction of Skull Island, once again, does not line up with what we've seen elsewhere, in the movies or in the comics. The village that Island Girl comes from, for example, clearly not the Iwis, but they've apparently been there long enough to at least establish some kind of a routine on Skull Island. So were they supposed to have been there the whole time? It doesn't feel like they should have been, and yet clearly they've been there long enough that Kong really seems to care about them more than he's cared about any other human being excluding Gia. So again, it feels like this is an alternate version, to say nothing of, again, that huge temple that Kong now lives in, which we didn't see before. We saw nothing like those ruins anywhere on this version of Skull Island. We saw them in the Peter Jackson version of Skull Island, sure, but that's not connected to this. So, again, it feels odd. Well, I've only got one more episode, so may as well move on to that. Only the last episode is bringing us back to the present, whenever the heck that is supposed to be, with the other characters that I really don't like. Maybe Kong will be able to save that one too? We'll find out. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.